Okay, I think I've got it all set up here, height-wise and everything. The height is just a little bit above that, which is okay because I'm using a plunge router to do it. All of the stop collars are set to the same height using my handy-dandy little pipe clamp set up for height adjustment. All four corners are the same height. The piece itself is screwed to the table using a piece of MDF board, and the piece is screwed to the MDF board, and the MDF board is actually screwed into the top of the table, just using regular deck screws, and it is very solid. That's not going anyplace, and that's what I'm going for when I do my router planing down to the appropriate height. The next step will then be, once I get this down about an inch or two, I'll stop and flip it over and do the bottom side, which I've been working on to get it almost level down on the bottom side so that it sits flat enough to where I can do this. Okay, let's go with the router. This is the router that I'm using. It's a Chicago Electric plunge router. It's got a 1.5 inch straight bit that I use to plane off the tops. As you can see, there's quite a bit of resin residue on the plate, so the next step is to clean that off with a little bit of steel wool so that it's nice and clean when I start using it. The resin cleaned off pretty nice using the steel wool. The next step is to use a little bit of beeswax to make it ride in the runners on the sled, which is right up here, a little bit easier as well. I'll be applying a coat of beeswax to the inside of each one of those runners on the sled as well. I won't be able to actually show the router planing in action because I'm a one-person operation here, nobody else to take the video for me. So what I'll do is say that you should always use the proper safety gear. I'm going to be using ear protection and eye protection because this router is a beast. Now, when you take a look at the router, the depth of plunge right now, the bit is down too far. So I'm going to raise that up and get it a little bit less depth of cut because that thing takes a lot of torque. It has a lot of torque when it goes on something like this. So I'll be raising that up, adjusting it to a little bit less depth of cut, and then as I go farther down, I'll be plunging it a little bit farther each time, taking off a little bit at a time. Okay, almost ready to go. That's a little bit more realistic depth of cut for the piece that I'm working on right now. So, be back in a minute. Okay, I'm working on the first pass. As you can see, there's at the deepest point, it's a little bit over 1/2 inch in depth of cut. So that works out well. This router can handle that, no problem. Another note that I wanted to make is that I have dust, my dust collection system going while I'm working on this, although I still get a little bit of dust in the air. As you can tell, I got a little bit of a frog in my throat, so I'll be back in a minute again. Alright, you can kind of hear the dust collector in the background. That's what this whole setup is. There's a furnace motor and fan on the other side that sucks the air through 2 furnace filters in the front, and it works very, very well. But like I say, I still get a little bit of dust. Now, this is the finished top on the first pass. You can see it's very flat, very parallel, and that's what I'm looking for. So once I get probably a couple more inches taken off, I'll flip this over, attach it to the piece of MDF, and start from the other side. The finished height of this pedestal, both pedestals actually, is going to be about 16 inches. So as you can see, I've got a ways to go, and I want to take most of the excess off the top of the pedestal to get a more stable base by taking less off down there. And right now it's got the nice toes and everything else that I want for a nice stable base. So I'm going to take a little bit more off the top here and then flip it over and do the bottom, and then it'll have to be flipped over again to get the 16-inch height that I desire. I've reached the full depth of plunge on this router, and as you can see I still have 2 inches to play with. So now it's time to flip this piece over and get the toes up on the upside. I'll also have to adjust the height of each one of the rails to make sure that the plunge router actually gets down to the piece. I'll drop them down by between 3/4 and 1 inch, and that should do it. As you can see, I had 2 deck screws holding this piece of MDF to the piece from the bottom side, and just to show you, they were put in as close to the edge as I possibly could get them and still not have it go through. So that's the whole idea in getting it stabilized in order to be able to hold it steady to route and plane on these pieces. So now I'll go ahead and flip it around. Be back in a minute. Okay, after multiple tries getting the thing flipped over upside down, I finally got it to hold where I want it to be. This is probably the most difficult part of the whole operation, getting the top part fastened so that it's just as stable as it was when it was on the other side. So next step is to go ahead and use the router to get it down at least 1 inch, I'm thinking, and then the other inch or so that's there yet I can use to play with the other pedestal, because I need to have 2 of them exactly the same height. So that's it for the tutorial. I'll take a few pictures after both pedestals are done. Well, as you can see, it's all set up. The bottom side is up, and there's plenty of room now to make that pass and get it as level as I can possibly get. And that's what makes this router planer so neat, because just a few passes and I've got parallel top and bottom, and it can't be any easier than this. I use the pipe clamp to adjust it to the correct height, and as you can see, I still have plenty to go. If I were making a table pedestal for a dining table, it would be just that simple, to move it up as high as I need it and then make the passes and get the top and the bottom perfectly parallel. That's it for this tutorial. I've got one more pedestal to go after this, and I need to do both of them at the same time to get them exactly the same height. So when I get to that point, I'll go ahead and put that on film as well. Well, I'm back. It took less than 2 minutes to take it down to about 17.5 inches. As you can see, the top, or the bottom actually, that's the foot. That's very, very flat. I'm going to be taking it off now and flipping it back over, and I'll take the rest off from the top of the pedestal itself. I want to see how flat this boot or this foot actually sits on the counter when I'm done. I got a little bit of kitchen cleanup to do here too. This particular type of pine, because it's a root, has a ton of resin. I wish this camera also had some type of way for you to be able to smell the resin. It's very powerful, and that's one of the reasons why I use the dust control that I do in my shop. So got a little bit of cleanup. There you have it. It sits very flat. It's got a flat top, and there's literally no wobble at all. The bottom is flat, the top is parallel to it. I'm going to go and get the tabletop and set it on and give you an idea of what it'll look like with that and with the other pedestal right beside it that has not been done yet. So be back shortly. That's what it looks like with the tabletop for the coffee table on it. Of course, that pedestal will be moved to one end or the other when I get the other one done. I'll be back shortly to show you what it looks like with both pedestals, but the one pedestal is just going to be sitting beside it because, of course, it hasn't been started yet. So this is what the other pedestal looks like. As you can see, the bottom is pretty flat already. I haven't done anything to this one. So whoever cut that with a chainsaw, I'm probably it, did a fairly decent job of getting it flat to begin with. So that's how much I have to take off, and then to get an idea of the other one. And then they should be on either end of the tabletop itself to give it a lot of stability, and it should turn out pretty nice.